be seeing something. So for those of you who joined via Facebook, in this iteration, it will not be possible to see the live screen with the presentation. You can watch that later on if you want. Right now, there's a link also in the invitation where you can join the live webcast, and there you have basically the live video screen and also the presentation where we go through some topics. So the topic for today is about the systemic orders for those who are searching family members, so in the context of ancestry and genealogy. So this is a new episode in the series Touching Circles, and I would like to dive right into the topic. So let's see if we can switch that here. So our topic today will be about an introduction into the area of systemic orders in the context of genealogy and ancestry or ancestors research. I will give a short recap of what we talked about in the previous session. Then I dive into the topic, and I get us started with talking about one of the systemic orders that we should be aware about. And then I would like to walk you through an interesting example case that we had in one of the seminars. And then it's time, as always, for a Q&A. So I will pick up some of the questions which were submitted after the previous webinar or between the webinars, and then it's open also for live Q&A. So you can use the chat room. I'm not sure yet how this will work with Facebook, but I guess we'll figure it out. And then I'll give a brief update on what's on the roadmap here. So in terms of a recap, we talked about the dilemma that we are in here if we are talking about family research. So in many families and clans, we're looking for the family members, and we have a certain idea who was there previously from the family records, but most importantly from the stories from the ancestors. But in most cases, the information is complete, and the further we go back in the previous generation, the more fuzzy it gets and the more incomplete it gets, of course. And there it's important also to recognize that it's not only about the factual information, but also about our intuition. So intuition and information go together. And it's important to also understand the systemic context of the family and the family situation. And then I talked a little bit in the previous webinar about the interplay between genealogy and the factual informational research and the systemic discoveries and the systemic experience when we are looking at family systems from a system perspective or from let's say a constellation perspective. And then I gave an example of, at that time it was fairly complex family tree, and I highlighted some of the areas where we have special areas where we encounter specific systemic topics. And then I gave an example of a concrete family constellation which was done in the context of genealogy and ancestors research. So the recap of last time, the key point there was that information and intuition are best friends. They go together, and also they are being enhanced through the experience, literally, where we are going out of our circle and into other areas, and where we are really experiencing the past history. For example, through making journeys into the areas in the country where the parents come from, or the grandparents, or the entire ancestors come from. And this augments and enriches our understanding and our experience, because it's also about, of course, a personal experience and a complete family experience when we are revealing and discovering certain insights about our ancestors. And more importantly, when we find certain dissonances and we can bring things back together again, then we often find that the solution creates not only a big resonance, but it also turns into a fulfilling or into a healing movement and experience for the entire family. We see that again and again in the context of family constellations. Okay, so today I want to talk about some systemic orders. That was a key topic I hinted already in the last episodes. Again, I should also say that these webinars are being held in English and in German. So if you want to follow that in German, it's typically a parallel topic. Sometimes the questions are a little bit different, but I try to keep it fairly consistent. Okay, so today I want to talk about one of the systemic orders. We will not be able to cover everything. It's just to get us going on a couple of these topics here. So first of all, we should start. What at all do we mean by a system? By a system, we mean in this context that we consider the family and its members as a system. So that means that each family member has her or his place on the family tree, if you want, or in the context of the family. And all members are connected with each other and also through the relationships. And more importantly, there's also feedback among the family members and also between family systems. For example, when two family systems come together, for example, in a partnership or through a marriage, where each partner is entering a new family system that they are building together, but also they are connected, of course, to their families of origin. And now we have a special situation, which is sometimes turning out in an interesting way, of course, as many of us know. Now, then the next question that we need to ask is, of course, who belongs to the family system, to a particular family system? And I'm asking this question not from a, let's say, formal or legal perspective, but more from a systemic perspective. And there are some differences which I want to highlight. So first, of course, our children belong to the family. Then the siblings, our partners, where we have partners, and parents, of course. And it doesn't matter if the family members are still there and still alive. They still belong to the family as a system. And also the siblings of the parents, so the aunts and uncles, and of course the grandparents and great-grandparents, and generations which go back much further. And in some families, it's very important to know that there's also, let's say, certain events which date back many generations, but they're still playing an important role in the current family, of course. Other members of the families we also need to include from a systemic perspective are, for example, previous partners of the parents, the grandparents, etc. And that is often forgotten. And here we have a first important thing to acknowledge, that these members of the families also belong to the system. Then we also need to include deceased family members, or those who have been missing, for example, during the war or for other reasons, and also deceased children, or children which were stillborn or aborted. So they also need to become family members. They are family members, and they need to receive, of course, and obtain their place. They need to have their place in the family system. And also the children which were conceived and brought up outside of a marriage or from an earlier marriage or earlier partnership. They also belong to the particular family system. And we also include those who have suffered from a disadvantage or damage from the family. And we see that very often in family-owned businesses, for example. And likewise, we also include those from whom the family or family business gained an important advantage. And these can be sometimes very challenging experiences also to discover when we go after family research and we discover certain things in the past where we say, oh, we didn't know that there were, let's say, even, for example, victims of certain incidents, or other people who the family or family business gained an advantage from. So it's important to include that in the perspective, in the systemic perspective. Okay, secondly, it's important to acknowledge that everybody who belongs to this family system has the same right of belonging. So, and what we mean by that, again, it's from a pure systemic point of view. So it's not from a legal or formal point of view, but more from a systemic point of view. And that's something that is very important. So each member of the family, and family as a system, has the same right of belonging to the family. Secondly, the system, the family system, is always striving for a balance. Okay, so there's no better or worse, but it's also striving towards completion, so being whole again. And that's an important discovery that has been made in the past. For example, through the work, the pioneer work in family constellations, like from Bert Hellinger in the early days, many years ago, and it's still an important topic today. So, and of course, we're making more and more discoveries as we are learning more through, for example, systemic family constellations about the orders and the movements in families. So, and that brings me to another topic here. What is actually the relevance and the impact? So which implications and systemic feedback and interaction may result from this? And I only want to mention here a couple of observations. And of course, there are so many things to observe because each family is different, and yet the orders in which these movements happen are the same. So two observations I want to call out here. One is a family member may have been disregarded or forgotten or completely excluded from the family. Or another typical case is that somebody takes the place of another family member. So replacing that family member, even though that is not her or his place to assume. For example, to assume the place of an earlier partner or other family members. And the movements resulting from that and the dynamics and the entanglements, for example, is that a living family member wants to replace another person. And of course, that's not possible, and that is violating an order and resulting in an entanglement and in an oftentimes a very challenging movement for the person and the family. Secondly, and without complete awareness and intention, when a person is excluded, some other family member might be imitating that family member for no obvious reason. And often it is a child or it's the children who raise the awareness through a certain, sometimes what we perceive as a strange behavior, certain activities, or sometimes even also illnesses that are being that are developed in this context. And of course, some family members are taken into the service of giving a place to the excluded or unseen or disregarded family members. And that is, of course, also a big topic for all of us who are searching in genealogy and ancestry. So how does this all relate and apply to ancestry and genealogy in a very pragmatic and concrete case? So now I want to bring here an example case from one of the seminars. And let me read this out. So for those who cannot see the presentation here, so the client in the seminar, Touching Circles, mentioned that it's about my father. So typically the way how we are working and the way I work is in the systemic constellation, we first ask what the topic is about. Then, and of course, we first get into resonance and tune. We ask about the topic and clarify the topic. And then we set up a constellation. So we pick representatives and we set up the system, in that case, the family system, right? And so the client brought the topic forward, and she said, it's about my father, and he told me about his father's absence. I mean, he was not missing, and not a missing person, but he said he was absent in a certain way. And my father was suffering under these circumstances. And so when we consider this from a pure, let's say, family tree or genogram point of view, of course, we have the client and her siblings, father and mother, and the grandfather plays a role. But then we set up this constellation for her as a service. And it turned out that when we picked a representative for the grandfather and her father, that the father was facing the mother and the mother was facing her son. But her grandfather, so her father's father, was always turning away, turning in a different direction. And we also set up other family members. So we knew that there were siblings, so we put the siblings also in the same constellation. And it turned out that also the siblings were looking away. They were looking all in the same direction. And that gives us already a first indication that something is missing. So we need to look for step by step what is missing. There are different ways of doing that in the way of working with family constellations, which I'm probably covering in more detail in one of the upcoming webinar sessions. And so we found out through the family constellation, and we discovered that there must be more members of the family, so that there were more siblings. But the client at that time didn't know. She said, I don't have any information, I don't have family records, but definitely now I'm really intrigued and I want to learn more about this. So we basically concluded the constellation with that. And then a few weeks later, the client came back with some feedback, and she wrote that after the seminar, we turned to a genealogist to gain more information about the family records. And oftentimes that is necessary when we need to go above and beyond what we have in our personal records, and we need to find different ways of getting the information. And she said, we found out that there were more siblings in grandfather's family indeed. Some were given to other families, and one brother emigrated to America. We got in touch with his family. And that is also happening, or happened very often in the past, that some families had to give away the children because they couldn't take care of them. They couldn't feed all of the children, so they were given to other families. And then she wrote that a peculiar thing was that also in the other family, there was a story that the grandmother often seemed to be absent with, that the grandfather seemed to be absent with his thoughts in his thinking. And there was no apparent explanation. And now we have a bigger family. So it's an interesting point, and it's a parallel that is happening there. And oftentimes we see that this is happening in many families, not in the exact way in the parallel, but we see that a movement is suddenly initiated in this realm, in this field, between the systems, between the family members, and things get into motion. So that's a very common thing that is happening here. So in conclusion, the work is about finding who is missing from a dual meaning perspective here. One is, of course, finding the factual information, but also finding who or what is missing in the family system. And it's interesting, in the spirit of these touching circles, the more we explore these circles and the more circles close and we gain more knowledge, the more we're touching each other's systems, and the more we explore, actually. So it's a very interesting movement and interesting exercise, of course, for a lot of families to do. And this is something that is being done in the service of life and love for many family members, because, as I mentioned before, we see again and again that this is a certain healing movement, a healing motion, when things come together and when the places are given to those family members who have not been seen or have been excluded, for example, on purpose. Okay, so that was a short introduction for today. And before we go into the Q&A, I want to say that there are, of course, further systemic orders that we can explore. So I will talk a bit more about that in the upcoming episodes. And if you are interested in more information, I mentioned already that the literature and the books from Bert Hellinger are very interesting and on the point in this regard. And he was a pioneer in family constellation, and is still working and expanding the field in the way he's working. And I certainly had the privilege of working with him, being trained by Bert Hellinger, Sophie Hellinger, and for me personally also filled with a lot of discoveries in their own family system. Secondly, forthcoming will be a short online course about touching circles. I will talk more about that in the next releases. And if you want to join, there are also live seminars, which are filled with interesting experiences. Brings me to another point. If you have similar experiences in your work, or you'd like to make similar experiences, we actually set up a Facebook group. So it's a closed Facebook group in addition to the Facebook pages that we have. And that's a good place to share information and experience, and also how to go about it. Or you can send email or share it in the online course forum. Okay, so that brings me to the Q&A. As always, I will take a couple of live questions, if there are live questions, but I figured out that most of the questions are coming after a webinar or before a webinar they are submitted. And so that brings me to one of the questions which I received from a previous participant. Let me read this here. So the previous webinar triggered some thoughts and research from me. Many of my finds came by accident or gut feeling. You spoke about the attitude. How should I think about it and prepare myself in this regard? Okay, so I brought a couple of points here. So in order to get into resonance with this way of working and to enter this this field, if you want, when we are working in constellation seminars, that forms a certain field. You can say an energy field or a knowing field. And a lot needs to be said about that. But one way to prepare yourself is, for example, through guided meditations. And that's certainly what I do with the participants in the live webinar. So we are going through a series of guided meditations, which are happening and evolving as we are moving forward with the topics. I will publish a couple of these guided meditations in audio or video format, so you can try this out yourself and prepare yourself. Secondly, I would definitely recommend making your own personal experience in the systemic constellation seminars, so the live seminars. And that is usually a shared experience, because what we learn again and again, if somebody brings forward a topic and we set up a constellation and we let it unfold, it has an interesting learning experience and learning effect for everybody in the field of that seminar. So it's important to understand and experience it for yourself. Then I will recommend the foundation seminar, so where we talk more about the systemic orders. And an upcoming webinar topic will be specifically about the attitude of the researcher and also people who are setting up and facilitating family constellations in this regard. Okay. Another question was, at our recent regional meetup, the topic of intuition and systemic constellation came up. Apparently, several of us had watched the episode. We would like to gain more insights and also look behind the family tree. I really love that expression, looking behind the family tree. Is there an opportunity to attend a seminar? The answer is yes, of course. Here I have a list of the upcoming live seminars which are planned and in preparation right now. So on the left side you see the major cities or regions in Germany, from Berlin, Hamburg, the Dresden, Leipzig area, Munich, Kassel, the Rhine-Neckar region, etc. But also the plan is next year again to combine it with some international instances. For example, in London, North America, probably South America, Brazil, and definitely in Zurich, where I'm also practicing. And most likely also in Austria, if there's a group that would like to spearhead that. So the way to get in touch is through the email constellations@wittigonia.net or the web contact form. And you can also on the web check out the event dates, and of course on the social media. If you just search for the keyword Constellateur with the C or @Constellateur, you find it on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, for example. There's a YouTube channel where you can see the live recaps of the webinars. Okay. Good. So, yeah, let me check if there are further questions here, but usually the questions are more likely coming afterwards. So I will also today have to check in Facebook, because we are broadcasting simultaneously in Facebook today, which is new. And I'm looking forward to your feedback about this experience. So the group is still growing there, but I hope you can share that. And if you prefer Facebook, we might do even more sessions in Facebook. But keep in mind, you can also attend the session in YouTube. So there's a live stream also in YouTube. But the best way to attend is, of course, in the live webinar room, because there we have the capability that you can send requests and start chatting also with us. Okay, so let me switch back to the upcoming topics. As I mentioned last time, there's more to say about the systemic orders and the approach. A specific topic will be about the attitude. It's something we highlight again and again for those who are working with systemic constellation, to work with a specific attitude. And I will also highlight probably the differences between the classical way of family constellation and the what is now being called the new constellation work, as it was developed by Bert and Sophie Hellinger. Then I talk also about what needs to be considered, because based from my learning and my experience, I discovered certain areas that are important, that we need to observe when we are working in this field and we are working in the family system, especially when we go into families of origins and further back into the family history. Okay, and yeah, so there are many more topics to cover. And if you have certain questions, like the ones we covered today, please feel free to send them up front. So I put something together. Also, if these are personal issues, indicate if you want to have this anonymous, or if you want to have your name mentioned there. But if you have a specific topic, a question, you can submit it, and I will be happy to take a look at it and also give you my response. Okay, so best way to use that is via the email constellations@wittigonia.net. And with that, I would like to conclude for today, and I wish you all the best and great discoveries in your family tree, and looking also behind the family tree as we heard it today. So good luck, and all the best to you. Bye-bye.